The stench of unwashed bodies and cheap whiskey clung to Murphy's saloon like a burial shroud thick enough to slice with a blade. Dakota pressed his war-toughened fingers against the grimy window pane, watching the crowd of miners jostle around two young women standing on crude wooden platforms inside the adjacent mine office. Their golden hair caught the lamplight, but their faces held the hollow desperation of cornered animals. He had been in Bitter Creek for 3 days, asking questions about his missing brother Lonato. Every inquiry led back to Rupert Pike's Sandstone Bluff mine, where workers vanished like morning mist and debts multiplied faster than prairie fire. The whispers spoke of a marriage lottery, a vile charade where Pike sold indentured contracts disguised as matrimonial arrangements. But something deeper nagged at Dakota's mind, fragments of recurring dreams that had haunted him for weeks, his brother's voice calling from somewhere dark and distant, speaking in riddles that made no sense in daylight. The eagle's nest holds bones, but the crow guards different secrets. The dreams had started 3 months ago, always the same. Lonato's voice echoing through darkness, warning of danger Dakota couldn't understand. Local miners spoke in hushed tones of strange sounds in the deep shafts, ghostly voices that echoed through abandoned tunnels. Some claimed to have seen spirits of dead workers still laboring in the darkness, while others whispered of a crow warrior who worked the night shifts, speaking to shadows in a language none of them recognized. Through the connecting doorway, Dakota observed the spectacle. The older sister, perhaps 23, stood rigid despite her torn calico dress. The younger one, barely 19, trembled like aspen leaves in wind. Their papers had been stolen, he'd learned from loose-tongued miners. Pike claimed they owed passage money from Germany, making them his property, until someone bought their contracts. $50 for the blonde, shouted a gap-toothed prospector waving rot-gut whiskey. 60 for the little one, she'd birth strong sons, called another spitting tobacco juice near the women's feet. Sheriff Angry Andy Doyle lounged against the office wall, his Colt Peacemaker loose in its holster, cruel amusement playing across his sun-damaged features. His reputation for violence preceded him like storm clouds. Just that morning, Dakota had witnessed Pike's brutality firsthand when the mine owner had a Chinese worker beaten senseless for spilling a water bucket. Pike had watched the assault with the same expression he might use observing cattle being slaughtered, detached, calculating, utterly without mercy. The room quieted as Doyle's pale eyes found Dakota through the doorway. "Well, well," the sheriff drawled, pushing from the wall with deliberate menace. "Look what wandered in from the reservation. Been asking questions about the mine, haven't you, Redskin?" Every head turned toward Dakota. The miners' faces twisted with familiar hatred and fear he'd known since the Black Hills War ended 4 years ago. His hand moved instinctively to the knife at his belt, a motion that didn't escape notice. "Easy there, Chief," Doyle said, hand resting on his gun butt. "This is civilized business, legal marriage contracts." He gestured mockingly toward the sisters. "Maybe you'd like to participate. Winner takes his pick, 1 girl, 1 contract. Might keep you busy enough to stop nosing around where you don't belong." Dakota stepped through the doorway into the office, his moccasins silent on sawdust-covered floors. The crowd parted reluctantly, hostile mutters following like wolf packs. Up close, he could see desperation in the sisters' eyes, how their hands shook despite attempts at courage. The older sister caught his gaze and held it. Something passed between them, not attraction, but recognition. She saw in his scarred face and steady bearing a man who understood survival, who had faced death and endured. The bullet groove along his left temple, the frost-damaged ear tip, the calloused hands spoke of harsh winters and harder battles, marking him as someone who might comprehend their plight. "I said you want a bid, Injun." Doyle's voice turned ugly, false courtesy stripped away. "Or just here to gawk like some reservation dog?" Dakota's response came quiet and steady, cutting through tobacco smoke and whiskey stench like steel through silk. "I take both." The room erupted. Chairs scraped as men surged upward. Bottles shattered. Someone shouted about savage polygamy, another about keeping white women pure. But Dakota's words carried the weight of Lakota tradition, ancient practice of taking multiple wives to protect them during warfare, ensuring survival when their own people could not. "Both." Pike sputtered, his round face flushing above his soiled vest. "That's not how this works, you heathen. One contract, one girl." "Two women, one protector," Dakota replied, voice never rising. "Lakota way. You want legal, this predates your paper laws." A drunk miner with tree trunk arms lunged forward, whiskey courage overriding sense. "No damned savage touches white women in my presence." Dakota moved with hunting cat grace. His left hand caught the miner's wrist mid-swing, twisting until bone cracked audibly. The man's howl was cut short as Dakota's right elbow connected with his solar plexus, dropping him like a grain sack. The room balanced on a knife's edge. Dakota felt violence building like pressure before thunderstorms. Doyle's hand tightened on his weapon, but he hesitated. Shooting an unarmed Indian might bring federal attention Pike couldn't afford. Using that uncertainty, Dakota grabbed the nearest table and heaved it toward the crowd. Bottles, cards, and coins scattered as men dove for cover. The younger sister screamed as a chair flew past her head. The older one grabbed her hand, pulling her toward Dakota. "This way," he shouted, shepherding them toward the door as the room dissolved into chaos. Men slipped on spilled whiskey, crashed together, cursed and flailed as someone kicked over a lamp. Outside, horses reared and whinnied as commotion spilled into the street. Dakota vaulted onto his paint stallion, pulling the older sister up behind him in one fluid motion. Her arms encircled his waist, and in that instant of contact, her breath against his neck, the desperate strength in her grip, something shifted inside his chest. For the first time since leaving the reservation, he felt protective of something beyond duty. She was becoming his reason to fight, though he barely understood why. "Hold tight," he commanded, his calloused hand covering hers on the saddle horn. Their breathing synchronized as bullets began whining past, splintering wooden barrels and storefronts. The younger sister ran alongside, torn skirts hampering her stride. A riderless sorrel horse bolted past, spooked by gunfire. Dakota leaned out and grabbed its trailing reins, bringing it close enough for the girl to scramble aboard. "Follow me," he called, wheeling toward the maze of alleys behind Main Street. More shots echoed behind them, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness like deadly fireflies. As they fled through narrow passages between buildings, Dakota felt the older sister's grip tighten around his waist. Her heartbeat rapid against his back, her trust absolute in his ability to keep them alive. He found himself adjusting posture to better shield her from wind, his body responding instinctively to protect this stranger who had become precious to him in mere moments. Behind them, Bitter Creek blazed with torchlight and anger. Ahead lay only darkness and uncertainty. But for the first time in 3 days of fruitless searching for his brother, Dakota felt clarity of purpose that had nothing to do with his own quest and everything to do with the 2 lives now depending on his strength. Bitter Creek squatted like a festering wound across the Wyoming Territory landscape, a coal mining boomtown that had sprouted around Pike's operation with all the permanence of a fever dream. The heat here was merciless, a furnace blast that turned metal too hot to touch and dried a man's throat to leather within minutes. Dust devils danced across the barren ground, carrying grit that stung exposed skin and made breathing an act of will. Water was scarce enough to fight over, and the alkali deposits left everything tasting of bitter salt. False front buildings lined the main street, their fresh-cut lumber already warping in the harsh climate. The creek itself ran black with coal dust, and mining runoff its poisoned waters unfit for drinking. Fire-damp methane leaked from poorly ventilated shafts under Red Rock Ridge, creating pockets of deadly gas that could ignite without warning, turning miners into human torches. Dr. George Whitlow operated his small clinic from a converted storefront, wire-mended spectacles perched on his nose as he tended miners with black lung strikers with broken bones, and women with bruises they claimed came from falling downstairs. His gentle hands and patient manner made him a rare beacon of decency in the rough town, though his attempts to treat Pike's workers often ended with threats from the mine owners' enforcers. Mary Collins taught school in a boarding house room barely large enough for 6 pupils, conducting lessons by dim lamplight through sheer determination. She had come west to escape scandal back in Ohio, a broken engagement to a man who preferred his bottle to her company, but found purpose educating children whose fathers disappeared into Pike's mine each morning. North of town, Lars Nystrom struggled to keep his small farm alive, despite the drought gripping the territory for 2 seasons. The sun had baked the earth to concrete hardness, and his irrigation gate, damaged by mysterious vandalism, barely channeled enough water from the creek to prevent his crops from withering completely. Pike had made increasingly aggressive offers to buy him out, each refusal bringing more accidents to his equipment. Dakota had arrived following conflicting rumors about his brother Lonato. Some claimed to have seen an Lakota Warrior working Pike's operation, asking dangerous questions about worker treatment. Others insisted the man was Crow, not Lakota, and worked night security watching over the trafficking victims. The contradictions gnawed at him like infected wounds, especially when paired with his recurring dreams. The battle scars marking Dakota's body told stories of survival in a world that wanted him dead. The bullet groove along his temple came from Slim Buttes, where he'd carried wounded warriors to safety under cavalry fire. His frost-nipped ear was a souvenir from the winter of 1877, when his band had hidden in the Bighorn Mountains, eating bark and leather to survive. His work-hardened palms bore calluses of a man who had hunted buffalo-built shelters and fought for every breath in a land that showed no mercy to the weak. The German sisters Felicity and Greta Brennan had fled their homeland after their father's bakery failed, and their mother died of consumption. They'd pooled meager savings for passage to America, dreaming of homesteading land in the territories. Instead, they'd fallen victim to a riverboat confidence man who'd stolen their papers and sold their supposed debts to Pike's labor recruiters. Felicity the elder, at 23, possessed her father's stubborn pride and her mother's fierce protectiveness, though she had never faced anything like the raw brutality of the American frontier. She'd worked alongside her father, learning to read ledgers and manage accounts with precision that would have impressed territorial businessmen had she been born male. Her German accent flavored careful English, but her intelligence was unmistakable. What terrified her most wasn't Pike's violence. It was the possibility of watching her younger sister broken by it. Greta, barely 19, had inherited her mother's gentle nature and gift for languages, though the frontier was teaching her that gentleness could be a fatal weakness. She spoke broken Lakota learned from a missionary's wife, a skill that would prove more valuable than she knew. Her hands were skilled at needlework and cooking talents that kept her and Felicity valuable to Pike as long as they remained tractable. Coyote Jane Morrison ran the only boarding house that didn't double as a brothel. A former cavalry scout's widow, she kept a shotgun behind her counter and asked no questions about guests' past transgressions. Her establishment included a small stable and hayloft that housed travelers who couldn't afford proper rooms. It was to Jane's stable that Dakota led the sisters after their escape, his paint horse lathered with sweat and the sorrel mare trembling from the wild ride. The older sister, he still didn't know her name, slid down with practiced ease, speaking of farm life, while the younger one required his steadying hand to dismount. Upstairs, he said quietly, gesturing toward the ladder leading to the hayloft. Safer. In dim light filtering through stable boards, he could see them clearly for the first time. The older sister had thundercloud eyes that missed nothing wheat-colored hair, braided in German style and hands bearing small scars from honest work. The younger one shared family resemblance, but possessed innocence the harsh frontier hadn't yet stolen. I am Felicity Brennan, the older sister said, in accented but precise English. This is my sister Greta. We owe you a debt we cannot repay. Dakota, he replied, settling cross-legged near the loft ladder with his knife across his thighs. Oglala Lakota, you owe nothing. Protection is given freely or not at all. Greta whispered something in German, then tried her broken English. Wamakaskan, that means animals in Lakota, yes, but you are not animal. You are beschützender Geist, protecting spirit. Dakota's weathered features showed surprise. Few whites bothered learning even basic Lakota words. Witzinkala waste, he said gently. Good girl. Where did you learn missionary woman on ship? Greta replied, her face brightening despite their circumstances. She teach me some words. Say, Lakota people very, intelligent, very smart. Felicity watched this exchange with growing understanding. This warrior who had risked his life for strangers possessed depths Pike's crude crowd couldn't fathom. His battle-hardened hands, marked by countless conflicts, had been gentle helping her from the horse. His dark eyes, which had shown deadly focus during the saloon fight, now held patience as he spoke with her sister. The sound of boots on the boarding house porch sent all three into tense silence. Dakota raised his knife, while the sisters pressed into shadows. Jane's voice carried clearly through thin walls as she spoke to someone outside. Haven't seen hide nor hair of any Indians tonight, Sheriff, she said in a tone suggesting she wouldn't cooperate even if she had. Maybe check the saloons, that's where most trouble starts. Doyle's voice was tight with frustration. Those girls are stolen property, Jane. Pike has legal contracts? Legal contracts, my foot, Jane interrupted. Since when do you care about legal anything, Andy Doyle? Those girls looked more like captives than debtors when I saw them in that office. Heavy footsteps circled the building, pausing outside the stable. Through gaps in boards, they could see badge gleam and rifle barrel. Dakota placed a protective hand on Felicity's shoulder, drawing her closer. Their eyes met in darkness, hers wide with fear, but trusting his steady with determination. Her fingers found his free hand, squeezing briefly, a gesture that sent unexpected warmth through his chest and made him realize protection was becoming something deeper. The moment stretched taut, until finally the footsteps moved away. They waited in silence until Jane's distinctive tap-tap-tap on the stable door indicated safety. You'll need supplies and a plan, she said without preamble when they climbed down. Pike won't let this rest. He's got too much invested in keeping his operation quiet. What operation? Felicity asked, her voice trembling despite her attempts at composure. The fear in her tone wasn't for herself. It was the terror of an older sister who had already failed once to protect the person she loved most. Jane's weathered face grew grim. Honey Pike's been running indenture schemes for 2 years. Girls like you Chinese workers, even some Indian families, get caught in his web. Makes them sign contracts they can't read, then works them until they die or disappear. Dakota's jaw tightened. My brother Lonato, have you heard this name? Lonato. Jane considered carefully. Now that's interesting. I've heard 2 different stories about a man with that name. Some say there's an Oglala warrior asking too many questions about working conditions. Others claim it's a Crow man working night security for Pike's special operations. Same name, but folks can't agree on which tribe or what he looks like. The contradiction hit Dakota like cold water. His dreams had been telling him something was wrong, that the truth about his brother was hidden beneath layers of deception. Where is he now? That's the strangest part. Jane continued. Last anyone saw of either Lonato was 3 months back. The Oglala one supposedly got transferred to another operation, but the Crow one still works here according to Pike's records. Makes a man wonder if there ever were two different people, or if someone's playing games with names and identities. The implication hung heavy in the dusty air. In territories where law enforcement answered to corporate interests, labor organizers and troublemakers had a tendency to vanish completely, their identities sometimes stolen and used to cover tracks. A soft knock interrupted them. Dr. Whitlow's voice called quietly, "Jane, it's George." The elderly physician entered carrying his medical bag, kind eyes, taking in the unusual gathering without judgment. Heard there was excitement at Murphy's tonight. Anyone need patching? Dakota showed his split knuckles from the brief fight, allowing Felicity to clean them with a damp cloth from the doctor's bag. Her touch was gentle, but efficient fingers steady despite the danger they faced. When she looked up to meet his eyes, something passed between them, and the recognition that they were no longer strangers, but allies, bound by shared peril. "You have gentle hands for someone who fights so hard." She whispered, her concern genuine. The simple care in her voice made his chest tighten with unfamiliar emotion. "Dr. Whitlow," Felicity said carefully, "what do you know about Pike's contracts? Are they truly legal?" The old man's face darkened. "Legal, in the sense that territorial law allows indenture for debt repayment, yes. Moral?" He shook his head. "Pike preys on people who don't understand American law, who can't read English well enough to know what they're signing. I've treated too many workers who've been disciplined for questioning their terms." "Then we fight," Dakota said simply. "Find proof Pike breaks law, take to territorial authorities." "The territorial authorities are 3 days' ride," Dr. Whitlow warned, "and Pike has Sheriff Doyle in his pocket. You'd need ironclad evidence and a way to get it past his people." Greta spoke up unexpectedly. "At home, Papa keep all papers in cassette strongbox. Maybe Pike also keep papers locked away." "The mine office has a safe," Jane confirmed. "But it's guarded day and night, and Pike never leaves the combination lying around." As if summoned by their discussion, multiple horses approached the boarding house. Through the window, they could see torches bobbing like angry fireflies. Pike's voice carried across the night air, harsh with rage and frustration. "I know they're here somewhere. Doyle, check every building, every root cellar, every chicken coop if you have to." Dakota rose smoothly, hand moving to his knife. "They come for us." Felicity stood beside him, fear evident but controlled. In lamplight, he could see determination in her thundercloud eyes, the set of her jaw speaking of inner strength inherited from generations of German farmers who had faced crop failures, wars, and famines without breaking. What he didn't see was the terror she felt at the thought of Greta suffering Pike's brutality, or the way his presence had become the only thing standing between despair and hope. "Where can we go?" she asked quietly, her voice barely trembling. "Schoolhouse," Dr. Whitlow suggested. "Mary Collins has helped people before, and the building has a root cellar that connects to the old mine shaft. Dangerous, but we'll take dangerous over certain death." Felicity interrupted, speaking for both sisters with authority that impressed Dakota and revealed the steel beneath her fear. As torches drew closer and angry voices echoed through the night, the unlikely alliance prepared to venture deeper into Bitter Creek's web of corruption and violence. Dakota found himself studying Felicity's profile in lamplight, noting strength in her bearing the protective way she positioned herself near her younger sister. She was no helpless victim awaiting rescue. She was a survivor like him. But she was also becoming something more precious than he dared acknowledge, even to himself. Dawn broke gray and sullen over Bitter Creek, the heat already shimmering off the packed earth like visible malevolence. Dakota woke from restless sleep in Mary Collins' root cellar to galloping hoofbeats and shouting voices. Through the small window at ground level, he could see a mule train approaching at dangerous speed, to the lead rider frantically waving his hat. "Cave in at the mine," the boy's shouted voice cracking with panic. Dynamite fumes caught fire, half the morning shifts trapped. The news sent chills through Dakota that had nothing to do with morning air. Underground explosions were common in poorly ventilated mines, often triggered by methane buildup or careless explosive handling. The Almy mine disaster in nearby Carbon County had killed 57 men just months ago when coal dust ignited like gunpowder, turning the tunnels into cremation chambers. Felicity emerged from the schoolhouse, where she and Greta had spent the night hidden beneath Mary's floorboards. Her wheat-colored hair was disheveled dress, wrinkled from sleeping on hard ground. But her eyes were sharp with concern and something else. Fear, but not for herself. The terror of someone who had already lost everything once and couldn't bear to lose again. "Lonato," she said simply, understanding immediately why Dakota's face had gone rigid with dread. "Must go," he replied, already checking his knife and preparing to move. "If brother is there, we come with you," Felicity declared, ignoring Greta's sharp intake of breath. "Too dangerous. Everywhere is dangerous for us now." Felicity interrupted, her German accent thickening with emotion. "Pike will use this chaos to eliminate problems. Better we stay together." What she didn't say was that the thought of him disappearing into those smoke-filled tunnels, possibly forever, made breathing difficult. He had become her anchor in this storm, and she was beginning to understand that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about having something worth living for. Mary Collins appeared in her doorway, schoolteacher's dress, exchanged for practical work clothes. "She's right, Dakota. Pike's been forcing striking workers back into the mine by threatening their families. If there's been an explosion..." She didn't need to finish. The four hurried through the awakening town, joining worried families rushing toward the mine entrance. The sight at Red Rock Ridge was hellish. Smoke poured from the main shaft, thick and black, with coal dust and burning timber. Men staggered from side tunnels, faces blackened with soot, coughing blood and debris. The smell of burned flesh mixed with coal smoke created a stench that turned stomachs and spoke of human tragedy. Rupert Pike stood near the mine office, round face flushed with exertion, as he barked orders at foremen. His concern wasn't for the trapped men, it was for lost production time. "Get those pumps running. I want every able-bodied man back in there. We've got quotas to meet." "Sir," ventured a young supervisor, "shouldn't we wait for the air to clear, the fire damp levels?" "The fire damp levels are my concern." Pike snapped spittle flying from his lips. "Every minute this mine isn't producing costs me money. Get them back to work." His callousness was breathtaking even by frontier standards. These weren't workers to him, they were machinery that had broken down and needed to be repaired or replaced. Dakota pushed through the crowd toward the main entrance, where Foreman Roaring Jack Cassidy stood guard with a double-barreled shotgun. Jack was Pike's chief enforcer, a man whose nickname came from shouting orders over mining equipment noise. His damaged hands and missing left thumb spoke of a career built on violence rather than industry knowledge. "Stand back, that slur," Jack growled, raising the shotgun to chest level. "This is company property." "My brother works here," Dakota said evenly. "I look for him." Nobody goes in without Mr. Pike say so, and he's got no use for you or your kind. Behind Dakota, the crowd pressed closer as more injured miners emerged. A Mexican worker collapsed nearby, his lungs laboring to process smoke-filled air. Dr. Whitlow knelt beside him, but his medical bag contained nothing that could clear coal dust from ravaged airways. Dakota's eyes swept the mine entrance, calculating distances and obstacles. The shotgun's effective range, other guards' positions, the fastest route to tunnel systems, where his brother might be trapped or worse. There, Greta cried suddenly, pointing toward a side tunnel. More men coming out? The distraction lasted only a second, but it was enough. Dakota's hand shot out, deflecting the shotgun barrel away from his chest as Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. The blast went wide, pellets spanging off rock and sending the crowd diving for cover. Before Jack could reload, Dakota grabbed a mining pick from a nearby cart and swung it in a wide arc that sent the foreman stumbling backward. The pick's metal point embedded itself in tunnel support beam inches from Jack's head, wooden handle vibrating with impact. "Greta, the barrels," Felicity shouted, gesturing toward water containers stacked near the mine entrance. The younger sister, moving with surprising coordination, rolled one of the heavy barrels toward the struggling men. Water sloshed out, creating slippery mess that sent several of Pike's guards sprawling. The confusion bought precious seconds. Felicity had already torn fabric from her skirt, fashioning it into a makeshift mask for a miner whose face was black with soot. "Breathe slowly," she told him in careful English hands, steady despite chaos around them. Her fear was transforming into action in the way it always did when someone needed help. Dakota plunged into the smoke-filled tunnel, following voices deeper in the mine. The air was thick enough to cut, filled with coal dust and burning wood's acrid smell. His eyes watered and lungs burned, but he pressed forward, calling his brother's name in Lakota. Behind him, he could hear Felicity and Greta helping other miners to safety, their voices rising above confusion as they organized rescue efforts with calm efficiency of people accustomed to crisis. Dart Door. Whitlow's instructions mixed with Mary Collins's attempts to keep children away from dangerous areas. 50 yards into the tunnel, Dakota found them 3 miners trapped behind fallen timber and rock. 2 were unconscious, overcome by smoke and methane. The third, a grizzled Irish worker called Copper Jim, was using bare hands to claw at debris. "Help me," Jim gasped when he saw Dakota. "There's more behind the wall, I can hear them moving." Together, they heaved aside coal chunks and splintered support beams. Dakota's superior strength and Jim's knowledge of mine construction made them effective. After 10 minutes of desperate work, they cleared a gap large enough to pull trapped men through. "Your brother?" Jim asked as they dragged unconscious miners toward cleaner air. "Lonato." Tall rope scars on hands, works night shift. Jim's blackened face showed recognition, but something else flickered in his eyes, confusion, perhaps fear. "That's the strange thing. I knew a man called Lonato Oglala like you. Good worker, asked too many questions about safety and pay. But he's been gone for months. Pike said he transferred to Colorado." The words hit Dakota like cold water. Gone how long? 3 months, maybe 4. But here's what's peculiar. Pike still has a Lonato on his payroll. Night security watches the special workers. Only this one's Crow, not Oglala. Different man entirely, but same name. Pike uses the confusion to throw off anyone asking questions about missing workers. The revelation struck like lightning. His dreams, the contradictory reports, the sense that something was wrong, it was all connected. Pike had been using the name Confusion deliberately, and somewhere in that deception lay the truth about his brother's fate. The missing Lonato, Dakota pressed. What happened to him? Jim's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. There was an accident in Section 7. Cave-in Pike said. Found some personal effects afterward, but no body. Pike claimed the debris was too dangerous to clear fully. He paused, eyes flicking nervously toward the tunnel mouth. But the thing is, I found this near the collapse site. Jim pressed a small object into Dakota's hand, an eagle feather bound with sinew, marked with clan symbols that identified it as belonging to his brother. The kind of sacred item no Lakota warrior would abandon willingly. If your brother's alive, he's not here, Jim said grimly. And if he's dead, Pike made sure no one would ever find proof. They emerged to find the rescue effort in full swing. Felicity had somehow organized miners' wives into an efficient medical station using supplies from Dr. Whitlow's bag to treat burns and smoke inhalation. Greta moved among the injured like a spirit, offering water and soft words in multiple languages. Pike's face was purple with rage as he watched his carefully maintained control dissolve into chaos. Doyle. Lee Selfer, he bellowed at the sheriff, who had arrived with several deputies. Arrest that Indian. He assaulted my foreman. But the crowd of miners and their families had seen what happened. They'd watched Dakota risk his life to save their people while Pike worried about production quotas. Roaring Jack, nursing a bruised ego and sizable knot on his head, found himself facing a wall of hostile faces when he tried to approach. He saved Tommy Murphy's boy, called out one woman. And old Henrik from the night shift, added another. While your boss worried about his precious coal quotas, Dr. Whitlow added quietly, his medical authority lending weight to the accusation. Doyle's hand hovered near his gun, but even he could read the crowd's mood. Shooting an Indian who had just rescued trapped miners would be difficult to explain to territorial authorities, especially with so many witnesses. This isn't over. Pike snarled at Dakota, small eyes glittering with malice. I'll see you hang for interfering with company operations. As the immediate crisis passed and injured were loaded onto wagons for transport to Dr. Whitlow's clinic, Copper Jim pulled Dakota aside. His voice was barely above a whisper, careful not to be overheard by Pike's remaining men. There's something else you need to know, he said urgently. Your brother, the missing one, he was gathering evidence against Pike. Names, dates, everything the bastard was doing to the workers. If that evidence still exists, it's hidden where Pike can't find it. Where? Don't know for certain, but he was asking questions about the assay shed by the river. That's where Pike keeps his real records, the ones he doesn't want territorial inspectors to see. If your brother hid something, that's where it would be. The pieces were falling into place. His brother had discovered Pike's crimes and died trying to expose them. But the evidence might still exist, waiting for someone brave enough to retrieve it. Tonight, Dakota said grimly. We get the evidence tonight. But as they spoke, Felicity appeared at his elbow, her thundercloud eyes bright with determination despite coal dust smudging her cheeks. She'd heard enough to understand the stakes. We heard, she said simply. We help you find this evidence. Too dangerous. Dakota began, but she cut him off with a gesture that was becoming familiar. Everything is dangerous now. Pike knows we can identify his operation, knows you saved his workers when he would have let them die. He will not let us live to tell authorities what we have seen. What she didn't say was that the thought of him facing Pike's men alone made her feel hollow inside, as if something essential had been carved out of her chest. He had become more than her protector. He had become the center around which her world revolved, though she was only beginning to understand the depth of that truth. By mid-afternoon, Pike had sealed Bitter Creek tighter than a coffin. Guards with rifles took positions at the wooden bridge spanning the creek, while others watched the telegraph office and main roads leading out of town. Anyone attempting to leave was questioned extensively about their business and destination. The heat made waiting unbearable, a furnace blast that turned metal too hot to touch and left everyone's clothing soaked with sweat. Mary Collins proved invaluable in the immediate aftermath of the mine rescue. Her schoolhouse had become an unofficial refugee center, with the root cellar serving as hidden sanctuary for the sisters, while Dakota scouted the town's defenses. The schoolteacher's modest reputation and unassuming demeanor made her an unlikely suspect in Pike's eyes, allowing her to move freely while gathering intelligence. "Pike's telling everyone that you kidnapped those girls from a legal auction," Mary reported as she returned from the general store with supplies. "Sheriff Doyle has deputized 6 men to hunt for you, and there's a $50 bounty on your head, dead or alive." Dakota absorbed this information without visible reaction, but Felicity noticed how his jaw tightened. $50 was more money than most territorial workers saw in 6 months. It would motivate even honest men to betrayal. "The assay shed," he said quietly. "Tonight, when moon is dark." The plan was simple in concept, but fraught with danger in execution. The shed sat on Bitter Creek's banks, isolated from the main mining operation, but within sight of Pike's office. A single guard typically watched it during daylight hours, but at night the area was patrolled irregularly by Doyle's men. They would have to time their approach, carefully retrieve whatever evidence existed, and escape before the next patrol cycle. As evening approached, Dakota prepared for the mission with methodical patience of a warrior. He checked his knife's edge, tested his moccasin soundness, and studied terrain between the schoolhouse and creek through Mary's small window. The sisters watched him work, noting calm efficiency of his movements. "In Germany," Felicity said softly, "we have word Kampfgeist, fighting spirit. You have this thing." "All people have fighting spirit," Dakota replied, not looking up from sharpening his blade. "Some just forget how to use it." Greta surprised them both by speaking in careful Lakota, "Wakantanka Kichiun." "May the Great Spirit be with you." Dakota's weathered features showed the first smile they had seen from him. "Waste. Good. Who taught you sacred words?" "Missionary woman say all prayers go to same place, just in different languages," Greta explained. "She teach me Christian prayer and Lakota prayer both." As full darkness settled over the town, they made their move. Mary Collins would remain at the schoolhouse to maintain illusion of normalcy, while the 3 approached the creek through connecting alleys and abandoned lots. The night air carried coal smoke smell and distant drunken voices from Murphy's saloon. The first obstacle came sooner than expected. Halfway to their destination, they encountered a patrol consisting of 2 of Doyle's newly deputized men. The pair walked directly toward their hiding place behind Jorgensen's feed store lanterns, swinging in methodical arcs as they searched for signs of passage. Dakota motioned for silence, then pointed toward a narrow gap between buildings. They would have to cross 15 feet of open ground to reach it, and timing would have to be perfect. The patrol's lanterns created overlapping circles of light, but there were brief moments when shadows fell between them. "When I move, you follow," he whispered. "Stay low, no sounds." He waited until the guards were at the furthest extent of their search pattern, then sprinted across the open space with hunting wolf grace. Felicity followed immediately, her skirts hampering movement, but determination overcoming the obstacle. Greta came last, her smaller size allowing her to dart through the gap like a sparrow. They pressed against the back wall of the abandoned blacksmith shop, breathing carefully as the patrol passed within arm's reach of their hiding place. One guard paused his lantern beam, playing across the ground where they had crossed. "Thought I heard something," he muttered to his companion. "Probably just cats hunting rats," the other replied. "This whole town's overrun with vermin." The patrol moved on, but the close call had rattled everyone's nerves. They waited several minutes before continuing toward the creek, taking a more circuitous route that added distance, but provided better cover. The second challenge came at the creek itself. Recent rains had turned the normally shallow stream into a rushing torrent of muddy water that reached Dakota's chest at its deepest point. The current was strong enough to sweep an unwary person downstream toward the mine's settling ponds, where waters were poisoned with chemical runoff. "I go first," Dakota said, testing the current with a fallen branch. "Find safest path." He waded in carefully, moccasins seeking purchase on slippery rocks below. The cold water shocked his system, but he pushed forward methodically, probing each step before committing his full weight. Halfway across, the current caught him, and he stumbled, going under briefly before fighting back to the surface. Felicity reacted instinctively, grabbing a wooden post from the creek bank and extending it toward him. "Here," she called softly, voice tight with concern, but controlled. "Take it." Her words carried more meaning than simple encouragement. They were a promise of partnership, acknowledgement that they had become responsible for each other's survival. Dakota grasped the post and used it to steady himself, his dark eyes meeting hers across rushing water. In that moment, with death inches away and her face etched with genuine fear for his safety, he understood that she had become essential to him in ways that went beyond duty or gratitude. "Pilamaya," he said simply in Lakota. "Thank you." The crossing took 20 minutes, with each person helping the next, while keeping watch for patrols. By the time they reached the far bank, all three were soaked and shivering, but they had successfully evaded Pike's security net. The assay shed proved to be a sturdy log structure with a single door and 2 small windows. A padlock secured the entrance, but the windows were secured only by wooden shutters held in place with simple latches. Dakota examined the building carefully, noting creaking floorboards inside and faint light of a banked fire in the small furnace used for ore testing. "Someone inside," he whispered, gesturing toward the thin line of light beneath the door. They circled the building, looking for another approach. The back window was partially open to provide ventilation for the furnace, creating a gap just large enough for Greta's small frame. But reaching it would require climbing onto the shed's sloped roof, a dangerous proposition given wet conditions and the noise it might generate. The solution came from an unexpected source. As they debated their options, they heard heavy footsteps inside the shed, followed by the distinctive cough of a man with black lung disease. The door opened, and a figure emerged, Copper Jim the miner, who had helped rescue trapped workers. "Jim," Dakota called softly. The Irish miner startled his hand, moving toward a pistol at his belt before he recognized the voice. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he whispered, then caught himself. "What are you doing here?" "The evidence," Dakota replied. "You said my brother hid it here." Jim glanced nervously toward the town, then gestured them closer. "Pike's got me working night shifts in the assay office testing ore samples for silver content. Figured it was safer than sending me back into the mine after what happened today." He paused, studying their water-soaked appearance. "You're taking a hell of a risk coming here." "Risk is everywhere now," Felicity said, her teeth chattering from cold water. "We need evidence to stop Pike before he kills more people." Jim's weathered face showed grudging admiration for her determination. "German girls got spine," he muttered. "All right, your brother's evidence is inside, hidden behind loose stones in the furnace foundation. But there's a problem. Pike changed the guard schedule after the mine incident. There's supposed to be a patrol through here in 15 minutes. They had to work fast." Jim led them inside, where warmth from the ore testing furnace provided blessed relief from cold night air. The shed was cramped with equipment scales, chemical testing supplies, and sample containers filled with ore from various mine sections. Following Jim's directions, they pried loose several stones from the furnace foundation. Behind them, wrapped in oilcloth, was exactly what Lonato had dyed to preserve a comprehensive record of Pike's criminal enterprise. The hidden cache contained not just ledgers, but also official documents. Pike had forged correspondence with trafficking contacts in other territories, and most damning of all, a detailed journal in Lonato's handwriting documenting every aspect of Pike's operation. But the most devastating discovery was a leather pouch containing Lonato's final message, written in his careful English and intended for delivery to his brother if the worst happened. "My brother, if you read this, it means Pike has learned I discovered his trafficking network. I am not afraid to die, but I grieve that I must leave this work unfinished. What I have learned sickens me. Pike does not simply exploit workers, he breaks them completely, then ships them to remote camps where they labor until death. Those who resist too strongly simply disappear, their deaths made to look like accidents. But I have also seen something else, the quiet heroism of ordinary people. The miner who shares his water with a weaker man. The doctor who treats injuries without asking for payment he knows will never come. The teacher who refuses to let children go uneducated simply because their parents are poor. These people show me that the true spirit of the people, what you might call the soaring heart of the eagle, lives not in grand gestures, but in daily acts of compassion and resistance. Your path will be different from mine, but no less important. Find your own way to serve, to protect, to build something good from the ashes of what has been destroyed. The strength of our ancestors flows in new channels now, but it flows still. If I do not survive to see you again, know that I died, believing the future belongs to those who refuse to surrender their humanity, no matter how harsh the world becomes." The letter was signed with Lonato's clan mark and a small drawing of an eagle in flight. Dakota felt grief and rage war in his chest as he read his brother's words. Lonato had died as he had lived protecting others, gathering evidence that could save lives, ensuring that truth would survive even if he didn't. "I hear," Felicity said, voice tight with anger, as she pointed to a specific entry in the trafficking ledger. "Our names listed as special shipment, scheduled for next week's transport to Colorado camps." But there was no time to fully process the horror of what they'd discovered. The sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed across the creek, and Jim's face went pale with fear. "Patrol's early," he hissed. "You need to go now." Dakota stuffed the evidence inside his shirt and the oilcloth, providing some protection against water they would have to cross again. As they prepared to leave, Felicity surprised him by placing her hand on his arm, her fingers warm despite the cold night. "Your brother," she said quietly, voice trembling with emotion. "He sounds like he was a man of honor. She paused, meeting his eyes in the lamplight. "I am sorry for your loss. And I need you to know I cannot bear the thought of losing you too." Her confession, spoken so quietly, he almost missed it, sent warmth through his chest that had nothing to do with the furnace heat. This wasn't just about survival anymore. She cared about him as a person, about the man behind the warrior's facade. The realization that he felt the same way about her hit him like physical force. The return journey proved even more treacherous than their approach. The patrol had spotted their tracks near the creek and was actively searching the area with torches and dogs. They had to take a long detour through the abandoned section of town, where empty buildings provided cover, but also concealed potential ambushes. At one point, they were forced to hide in the ruins of an old church destroyed by prairie fire years earlier. Pressed together in the narrow space behind the collapsed altar, Dakota became acutely aware of Felicity's presence beside him, her steady breathing, the faint scent of lavender soap that somehow clung to her. Despite their ordeal, the way her hand found his in darkness when they heard footsteps passing nearby. "Your brother lives in this," she whispered against his ear, her breath warm on his neck as she touched the evidence hidden in his shirt. "His sacrifice has meaning. You have given it meaning." Her words offered comfort he hadn't expected to need. The woman who had started as a stranger requiring protection had become someone whose opinion mattered more than his own safety, whose faith in his quest gave him strength to continue. When they finally reached the schoolhouse, as dawn approached, Mary Collins met them with hot coffee and worried questions about their success. The evidence and accompanying documents were spread across her kitchen table, revealing the full scope of Pike's criminal enterprise. "This proves everything," Mary said, her teacher's eye quickly cataloging the evidence. Forged indenture contracts, bribery payments to Sheriff Doyle, falsified mining safety reports, even documentation of workers who were eliminated for asking too many questions. But their moment of triumph was short-lived. As morning sun painted the eastern sky with shades of gold and crimson, the sound of marching feet echoed through Bitter Creek streets. Pike had mobilized his entire security force, turning the town into an armed camp. They had the evidence they needed to destroy him, but now they had to survive long enough to get it to territorial authorities. The real test of their partnership was about to begin. 3 weeks later, the territorial magistrate Judge Auguste Antona held court in Sidewinder Springs, a 3-day ride northwest through some of the most unforgiving country in Wyoming territory. The route crossed open prairie patrolled by Pike's men, wound through badlands where flash floods could trap travelers in deadly arroyos, and passed through territory where Cheyenne war parties still occasionally raided isolated homesteads. The landscape itself seemed determined to kill them. The sun beat down with furnace intensity, turning metal too hot to touch and drying their throats to leather. Alkali dust filled their nostrils and coated their tongues with bitter salt. Water was so scarce they had to ration every drop, and the few streams they encountered ran brown with mineral deposits that could poison a horse. Dakota studied the map Mary Collins had sketched on brown paper, noting landmarks and potential hazards. "Cottonwood Creek runs dry this time of year," he said, pointing to a dotted line indicating seasonal water. "Have to carry enough for 3 days, maybe 4 if we get delayed. Pike will expect us to head straight north." Felicity observed her finger tracing the most direct route. "Maybe we go west first, then circle around through rougher country." Her tactical thinking impressed him. Most people would have chosen the fastest route without considering pursuit patterns. But Felicity understood that survival often required patience and indirect approaches, lessons the frontier was teaching her in the harshest possible way. They left Bitter Creek before dawn, slipping out through abandoned mining claims south of town while Pike's patrols focused on main roads. Mary Collins had provided what supplies she could: dried beef hardtack and a canvas water bag that might sustain them for the journey. Darkmaster Whitlow contributed medical supplies, and his spare revolver a reliable Colt Army model that Felicity accepted with surprising familiarity. "Papa taught me to shoot when I was 15, she explained, checking the cylinder with practiced movements. "Wolves came close to farm during bad winter. Papa said American frontier would be no different." Greta carried her own burden, a small sewing kit that contained more than needles and thread. Hidden among the bobbins were several gold coins their father had sewn into her corset before they left Germany, a last desperate hedge against complete poverty. The first day's travel took them through rolling grassland that had been blackened by prairie fires earlier in the summer. The scorched earth offered little cover, forcing them to rely on speed and hope that Pike's men were still searching closer to town. Dakota set a punishing pace, his paint stallion and the sisters' borrowed horses, covering nearly 40 miles before they stopped to rest. Their first real test came at midday, when roaring Jack Cassidy appeared on the horizon with 3 other riders moving fast along their back trail. The foreman's tracking skills were better than Dakota had anticipated, and the open terrain offered few places to hide. There, Dakota pointed toward a line of cottonwood trees, marking a dry creek bed. We make stand if needed. They reached the trees just as Jack's party came within rifle range. The cottonwoods provided blessed shade and some concealment, but they were trapped in a position with limited escape routes. If Pike's men decided to wait them out, thirst would eventually force surrender. Dakota unslung the Spencer carbine he'd taken from Pike's office during their escape, checking the 7-round magazine tube with automatic precision of a veteran soldier. The rifle had served him well during the Indian Wars, and its 50 caliber rounds could drop a horse at 300 yards. "Can you load?" he asked Felicity, indicating the weapon. "Show me," she replied, voice steady despite approaching danger. He guided her hands through the loading process, his calloused fingers covering hers as he demonstrated proper technique. Their breathing synchronized as she followed his instructions, and he found himself noting the determined set of her jaw, how her thundercloud eyes never left his face as she absorbed the lesson. When their foreheads nearly touched as she bent to sight down the barrel, he caught the faint scent of her hair and felt his pulse quicken. The truth hit him then, with startling clarity. She had become the center of his world, and the reason he fought the future he was building in his mind. 7 shots, then reload. He instructed, his voice rougher than intended. Aim for horses, not men. Horses are bigger targets. The exchange took less than a minute, but in that brief time, something shifted between them. Trust deepened into something approaching love, though neither was ready to name it yet. Jack's voice carried clearly across prairie, "Come out that slur. Make this easy on yourself." Dakota's response was a carefully aimed shot that kicked up dirt 10 feet in front of the lead horse. The animal reared and whinnied, nearly unseating its rider and sending other horses dancing sideways in alarm. "Next one goes through your belt buckle, Jack," Dakota called back. While the men cursed and fought to control their mounts, Greta slipped through the trees to where several loose horses had wandered, drawn by the scent of water that might remain in deeper parts of the creek bed. Her gentle manner with animals, learned from helping with her father's delivery wagon, allowed her to approach without spooking them further. "I get them confused," she whispered, her broken English endearing despite danger. "Horses run different ways, men not know which way we go." Her plan worked perfectly. When she scattered the horses by waving her apron and shouting in German, the animals bolted in multiple directions across the prairie. Jack's men found themselves chasing shadows, while their quarry slipped away along the creek bed, heading west toward more broken country. The second major obstacle came that evening when they sought shelter at Lars Nystrom's farm. The Norwegian homesteader welcomed them with automatic hospitality of frontier life, but his weathered face showed concern as he listened to their story. "Pike's been pressuring me to sell," Lars explained as his wife Anna served them soup made from their own vegetables. "Claims he needs the land for mine expansion, but I know better. He wants my water rights." The farm sat at a crucial point, where Bitter Creek emerged from the hills, and Lars's irrigation gate controlled water flow to several downstream properties. Pike's mining operation required enormous amounts of water for ore processing, and controlling Lars's gate would give him leverage over other landowners in the valley. "Gate's been sabotaged twice this month." Lars continued, gesturing toward the irrigation channel behind his house. "Cut cables, broken gears. I fix it, but next week something else breaks." Dakota examined the gate mechanism by lamplight, noting precise cuts in cables and how certain bolts had been deliberately loosened. This wasn't random vandalism. It was systematic sabotage designed to force Lars into bankruptcy. "We help you fix," he offered. "You help us reach Sidewinder Springs." The bargain was struck, but their work was interrupted by the appearance of Crooked Teeth Tom Morrison, one of Pike's more vicious enforcers. Tom had acquired his nickname after a bar fight left him with a mouth full of broken teeth, and his disposition had soured accordingly. Tom approached the farm openly, rifle in hand, making no attempt at stealth. His message was simple: Lars would sell his land to Pike within the week, or accidents would start happening to his family. "You've got strangers here, Nystrom." Tom observed, weapon trained on the group gathered around the irrigation gate. "Strangers can bring all kinds of trouble to a peaceful farm." The threat was clear. Lars could protect the fugitives and risk his family's safety, or turn them over to Pike's men and save his homestead. The Norwegian farmer's response surprised everyone. Instead of capitulating, he stepped forward with his own shotgun, placing himself between Tom and his guests. "This is my land," Lars said quietly, accent thick with emotion. "In the old country, we learned that some things cannot be bought or scared away. Honor is one of those things." The standoff lasted several tense minutes before Tom decided that killing a respected homesteader might bring unwanted attention from territorial authorities. He withdrew with promises of future retribution, but his retreat bought them valuable time. That night, as they worked to repair the irrigation gate, Dakota found himself working closely with Felicity, while Greta helped Anna Nystrom prepare supplies for their continued journey. The shared physical labor created opportunities for conversation that their desperate flight had not allowed. "In Germany," Felicity said as she held a cable steady while he spliced a new connection, "Papa always said that good fences make good neighbors. But here it seems like good fences make enemies." "Your papa was wise man," Dakota replied, testing tension on the repaired cable. "In Lakota country we say, Maka waistun kin hioyate kin waist yakompikta. The good earth will keep the people well. But white man wants to own everything, even flowing water." Their hands brushed as she passed him tools, and he became aware of her nearness in lamplight. How her wheat-colored hair caught the flame's glow, the concentration on her face, as she learned to work with unfamiliar equipment. She was adapting to frontier life with remarkable speed, her German practicality serving her well in this harsh environment. But more than that, she was becoming someone he couldn't imagine living without. A sudden sharp pain made him wince as a metal splinter from the cable pierced his palm, drawing blood. Felicity immediately reached for his hand, examining the wound with gentle but efficient fingers. "Let me," she said softly, her voice carrying an intimacy that made his heart race. As she carefully extracted the splinter and bound the cut with fabric torn from her petticoat, their eyes met and held. "I cannot watch you bleed and do nothing." She whispered the confession, slipping out before she could stop it. "You have become essential to me." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings and the recognition that they had become essential to each other's well-being in ways that transcended mere survival. Her touch lingered longer than necessary, and he found himself memorizing the curve of her cheek in the lamplight. The intimacy was shattered by approaching hoofbeats. Tom had returned with reinforcements surrounding the farm with armed men. This time, there would be no negotiation. 1 month after their escape from Bitter Creek, the third and most dangerous obstacle came at the railroad trestle crossing Willow Creek, 15 miles from Sidewinder Springs. The wooden bridge was the only practical way to cross the swollen creek, but Roaring Jack had anticipated their route and positioned his men to control the crossing. Jack stood in the middle of the trestle with 2 rifles, making passage impossible without direct confrontation. The alternative was a 20-mile detour through Badlands, where flash floods and rattlesnakes pose their own deadly threats. "We go under," Dakota decided after studying the situation. Bridge has support beams cross underneath while they watch top. The plan was audacious and terrifying. They would have to climb down into the creek bed, work their way along muddy banks, then climb up wooden supports while hanging over rushing water 30 feet below. One slip would mean death, and they would be completely exposed if Jack's men spotted them. Dakota went first moccasins, finding purchase on wet wooden beams as he worked his way across hand over hand. The Spencer rifle and his knife made the crossing more difficult, but abandoning weapons wasn't an option. Halfway across, disaster struck. One of the support beams gave way under his weight, dropping him toward rushing water below. Only his grip on a cross brace saved him from falling, but the sound of splintering wood echoed across the creek like a gunshot. "What was that?" Jack's voice called from above. Thinking quickly, Dakota pulled a railroad spike from his pocket, salvaged from their earlier encounter at the rail spur, and threw it as hard as he could toward the far bank. The metal spike clattered against rocks, creating a distraction that drew guards' attention away from the bridge. While Jack's men investigated the noise, Dakota completed his crossing and helped the sisters navigate the treacherous route. Felicity's farm girl strength served her well as she pulled herself along the beams, while Greta's small size allowed her to find handholds that would have been impossible for larger people. Just as they reached safety on the far side, one of Jack's men spotted movement below the bridge. Rifle fire erupted, bullets splintering wood and sending fragments flying in all directions. A ricocheting shot struck the kerosene lantern one of the guards was carrying, spilling burning oil across dry wooden planks. Fire spread rapidly along the trestle, creating a wall of flame that cut off pursuit but also destroyed the bridge for future travelers. As they fled into darkness beyond the creek, Dakota couldn't help but feel a mixture of triumph and regret. They had escaped Pike's trap, but the cost would be borne by innocent people who needed the crossing. Behind them, Jack's curses echoed across the burning trestle as Pike's men found themselves cut off from their quarry by their own aggressive tactics. The fire would burn for hours, visible for miles around a beacon announcing their escape, but also a warning of the destruction that followed in Pike's wake. As they rode towards Sidewinder Springs through pre-dawn darkness, Dakota became increasingly aware of changes in his relationship with the Brennan sisters. What had begun as a warrior's duty to protect the helpless had evolved into something more complex. Felicity's quiet competence, her willingness to learn dangerous skills, her steady presence during crisis, all had earned his respect in ways that had nothing to do with her gender or need for protection. More than that, the thought of losing her had become unbearable. She was no longer someone he was protecting. She was someone he was building a future with, though neither had spoken the words aloud. Sidewinder Springs had earned its name from the serpentine course of the creek that wound through its heart, but the town itself was considerably more civilized than Bitter Creek. Whitewashed buildings lined streets wide enough for freight wagons, and the courthouse, a solid 2-story structure of local stone, dominated the central square with authority that spoke of genuine law rather than corporate tyranny. Judge Auguste Antonin maintained his chambers in the courthouse's east wing, where tall windows provided excellent light for examining legal documents. The magistrate was a lean man in his 50s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected lives and property. His French accent spoke of New Orleans origins, but his knowledge of territorial law was encyclopedic. "These documents," he said, carefully adjusting his spectacles as he studied Pike's ledger and Lonato's journal, "appear to substantiate serious criminal charges: fraud, kidnapping, conspiracy, murder." He paused, looking up at the bedraggled trio who had risked everything to bring him evidence. However, they must be authenticated by territorial officials and corroborated by witness testimony before I can issue warrants. Dakota felt his heart sink. How long? 2 weeks minimum, possibly longer if Pike's attorneys challenge the evidence's admissibility. These men have resources and political connections that... The judge's explanation was interrupted by commotion in the outer office. Heavy boots echoed on wooden floors, and a familiar voice demanded immediate attention. A man Dakota didn't recognize burst through the chamber doors, his face gaunt and clothes torn from hard travel. "Your Honor," the stranger gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "My name is Thomas Whitefeather, Crow Nation. I escaped from Pike's trafficking operation 3 days ago. I have been hiding in the hills, afraid to come forward, until I heard others were fighting Pike." Antonin gestured toward a chair, but Whitefeather remained standing, urgency overriding protocol. "I have information about the murder of an Oglala warrior named Lonato. I was forced to watch." The words hit Dakota like bullets to the chest. His brother, his real brother, had been murdered just as he'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed was still devastating. Pike had him beaten first. Whitefeather continued, his voice shaking with remembered horror. Tried to make him reveal where he'd hidden evidence of the trafficking operation. When he wouldn't break, they caused the cave-in in Section 7. But before he died, Lonato gave me this. Whitefeather handed Dakota a small piece of cloth with words written in charcoal. His brother's final message: "Brother, if someone reads this, know that I died, believing the future belongs to those who refuse to surrender their humanity. The strength of our people flows in new channels now, not through war, but through the quiet persistence of those who will not be broken. Find your own way to serve. Build something worthy of our ancestors' sacrifice." Below the message was drawn a simple eagle wings spread in flight. Dakota felt tears he had held back since beginning his search finally come. But they were tears of pride as much as grief. Lonato had died as he had lived, protecting others, refusing to break under pressure, ensuring that truth would survive, even if he didn't. Judge Antonin leaned forward, his expression grave. "With this witness testimony and the documentary evidence, I have sufficient grounds to issue immediate federal warrants. But Pike won't surrender quietly, and he has significant resources at his disposal." But even as the judge spoke, the sound of galloping horses echoed from the town square. Through courthouse windows, they could see riders approaching at dangerous speed. Pike's men led by Roaring Jack Cassidy himself. "They followed us." Dakota realized, hand moving instinctively to his knife. "Tracked us here." The revelation about his brother's heroic death should have broken him, but instead it crystallized his purpose. Lonato was beyond saving, but the people who had become precious to him were not. His grief would have to wait. Survival came first. "We go back," he said quietly, dark eyes meeting Felicity's thundercloud gaze. "Stop Pike before he kills more innocents." "That's suicide," Whitefeather protested. "Pike's got the whole territory mobilized, armed men everywhere. Pike's weakness is his greed." Dakota interrupted his warrior's mind, already calculating strategies. "He keeps duplicate records because money is more important to him than secrecy. Those records can destroy him, but only if we get them to federal authorities." Felicity stepped closer, her hand finding his in the chaos of their situation. "Your brother," she began, voice thick with sympathy, "is dead." Dakota finished, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. "But we are not. And Pike will pay for all of it." Her touch was brief, but grounding, a reminder that their partnership had evolved beyond practical necessities of survival. When she looked at him now, He saw not pity for his loss, but fierce determination to help him find justice. The realization that he needed her not just for survival, but for meaning, for hope, for a future worth living, had become absolute truth. The sound of boots on courthouse stairs forced them into motion. They fled through Antonin's private quarters, carrying federal warrants that would mean nothing if they couldn't survive to serve them. Behind them, Jack's men ransacked the judge's chambers, looking for evidence that their quarry had been there. 2 days later, the storm that struck as they left Sidewinder Springs was the kind of biblical deluge that transforms Wyoming landscape from harsh beauty into deadly trap. Rain fell in sheets so thick, visibility dropped to mere yards, while lightning illuminated prairie in stark, terrifying snapshots. Flash floods turned every depression into raging torrent, and wind carried cold that cut through wet clothing like a blade. Dakota led them toward a line of sandstone bluffs that offered potential shelter, but rocky terrain became treacherous in the downpour. Their horses struggled for footing on surfaces that had become slippery as ice, and more than once they had to dismount and lead the animals by hand to prevent catastrophic falls. "There," Greta called through wind and rain, pointing toward what appeared to be a dark opening in the cliff face. "Cave." The shelter proved to be a natural cavern carved by centuries of water erosion, deep enough to provide protection for both humans and horses. They stumbled inside, soaked to the skin and shivering with cold, their supplies damaged by fierce weather. But the cave was dry, and Dakota's flint and steel managed to coax life from tinder that had stayed protected in his medicine bag. As the small fire cast dancing shadows on cave walls, they took stock of their situation. Pike's evidence and Judge Antonin's warrants had survived the storm wrapped in oilcloth that kept them readable despite the deluge. "We cannot go back to Sidewinder Springs," Felicity observed as she wrung water from her skirts. "Pike's men will be watching every approach to the courthouse. And we cannot go forward to the territorial capital," Dakota replied, checking his weapons for water damage. 3 days through country Pike controls, maybe more in this weather. They were trapped between Pike's immediate presence and federal authorities, who could stop him with no clear path to safety for themselves or justice for his victims. The storm had bought them temporary respite from pursuit, but it had also isolated them in country where survival itself was becoming the primary challenge. It was Greta who suggested the solution, her words hesitant, but growing more confident as she spoke. In Germany, when Papa's bakery was investigated by tax officials, they could not destroy all records. Always some papers kept elsewhere with lawyers or banks or... She paused, searching for the English word. Partners. Business partners. Pike's got connections in Bitter Creek. Dakota agreed. But his operation is too big for one town. Money has to go somewhere, contracts have to be filed. The Territorial Bank in Carbon Creek. Felicity added, her commercial instincts sharpening. Papa taught me about business records. Big operations always keep duplicate ledgers in case of fire or theft. Carbon Creek was Pike's supply depot where equipment and provisions were shipped in by rail before being transported to Bitter Creek. More importantly, it was where the Territorial Bank maintained records for mining operations throughout the region. If Pike kept duplicate financial records anywhere, it would be in Carbon Creek's vault. But reaching Carbon Creek meant infiltrating Pike's stronghold, penetrating the heart of his operation, while his security forces were at maximum alert. It was arguably the most dangerous plan they could have conceived, which made it perhaps the only one Pike wouldn't anticipate. The storm raged through the night, giving them time to rest and plan, while Pike's men took shelter wherever they could find it. But Dakota's mind kept returning to his brother's final message, and to the woman sitting beside him whose presence had become essential to his sense of purpose. Felicity seemed to sense his inner turmoil. Without words, she moved to sit beside him by the fire, her shoulder touching his in a gesture of comfort and solidarity. The simple contact grounded him, reminding him that while he had lost his brother, he had found something equally precious in this courageous woman who had chosen to share his dangerous path. "He would be proud of what you do now," she said softly, her hand finding his. "Your brother, his sacrifice means something, because you give it meaning." The warmth of her touch and the certainty in her voice helped quiet the storm in his heart. She had become his anchor, and the truth he'd been avoiding finally surfaced. He loved her. Not just as a protector or ally, but as a man loves a woman who has become essential to his soul. "Felicity," he began, and then stopped, unsure how to voice what he felt. "I know," she whispered, understanding without needing words. "I feel it too. Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." As the sun rose, revealing a landscape transformed by the night's violence, they implemented their desperate plan. The workers' bunkhouse at Carbon Creek sat on the outskirts of town, and it was here that Pike held his trafficking victims before shipping them to remote operations. They approached in pre-dawn darkness, timing their arrival to coincide with Pike's scheduled transport. Dakota moved with silent precision, neutralizing the guards, while Felicity and Greta freed the captive workers. Among them was Lakota Kill's enemy, the Crow Warrior, whose name had been used to confuse inquiries about the missing Oglala. "Your brother spoke of you before they killed him," Lakota Kill's enemy told Dakota as they prepared for the assault on the bank. "He said you would come looking, and when you did, to tell you this, the warrior's path takes many forms, and yours will protect more people than his ever could." The territorial bank was an imposing structure of red brick and iron designed to project stability and security. But Pike's solution to the threat they represented was characteristically brutal. If he couldn't control the evidence, he would destroy it, along with anyone who might use it against him. The Carbon Creek Territorial Bank erupted in flames just as they reached the building's rear entrance. Pike's arsonists had done their work with professional efficiency, turning the substantial brick building into a blazing inferno within minutes. The heat hit them like a physical wall, searing their faces and making breathing difficult even at a distance. Black smoke poured from every window, carrying the acrid stench of burning paper and chemical accelerants. The fire's roar was deafening, punctuated by the sharp crack of exploding glass and the groaning of structural timbers under extreme stress. Dakota's heart pounded as he calculated their chances, each beat thundering in his ears like war drums. His pulse hammered so hard he could feel it in his temples, and his breathing came in sharp bursts as adrenaline flooded his system. The smell of burning creosote and coal tar from the building's construction materials created a nauseating haze that burned their throats and nostrils. "The vault," Felicity cried, pointing toward the billowing inferno. "All the records. Safe as fireproof." Dakota interrupted his warrior's mind, calculating rapidly, even as sweat beaded on his forehead from the intense heat. Built to survive disasters. Records inside might survive if we get them before building collapses. Through the smoke, they could see the building's wooden framework beginning to buckle. Thick timbers that had stood for decades were warping and splitting under the extreme temperature. The clock tower above the main entrance swayed ominously, its brick facade already cracking from thermal expansion. 26 minutes. Lakota Kill's enemy estimated grimly, his experienced eye assessing the fire's progress as wooden support beams began to glow, cherry red in the heat. Maybe less before total structural collapse. The countdown had begun. Every second counted now, every heartbeat, bringing them closer to catastrophic failure. As they prepared to enter the inferno, Dakota felt Felicity's hand grip his arm with desperate strength. "If we don't make it out," she said, her voice barely audible over the fire's roar, "I need you to know. We make it out." He interrupted, covering her hand with his. "Both of us. Together." They had to move fast. The delivery entrance was already belching smoke flames, licking hungrily at the doorframe, but it remained their best option. Dakota soaked his shirt in water from a nearby horse trough and then wrapped the cloth around his face as makeshift protection. Inside the bank was a vision of hell. Flames danced along wooden countertops, consuming account books and legal documents with hungry efficiency. The air was thick enough to cut, filled with burning paper ash that stung their eyes and coated their throats. The temperature was so intense that metal fixtures were beginning to glow red hot, and the floor beneath their feet radiated heat through their boot soles. Dakota's heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his temples. Each breath seared his lungs, and sweat poured down his face, mixing with tears from smoke-irritated eyes to create muddy streams through the soot coating his skin. 23 minutes. Dakota shouted over the fire's roar, his voice muffled by the wet cloth covering his face. They stumbled through the smoke-filled interior, following Lonato's directions toward the vault. The Crow Warrior had observed the bank's layout during his captivity, and his knowledge proved invaluable in navigating the maze of desks and filing cabinets that now served as fuel for the inferno. The vault door radiated heat like a furnace, but remained structurally sound. However, the combination lock mechanism had jammed, expanded by the extreme temperature, until the tumblers could no longer move freely. 20 minutes. The building shuddered around them as a major support beam gave way, somewhere above sending a shower of burning debris raining down from the ceiling. Chunks of flaming plaster and wood struck their shoulders and backs, and Felicity cried out as a burning ember seared through her sleeve to the flesh beneath. Dakota and Lonato attacked the lock mechanism with iron bars and a sledgehammer found in the bank's maintenance closet. Each blow sent shockwaves up their arms, and the heat from the metal tools burned their palms, despite the wet cloth wrapped around the handles. The sound of metal on metal rang out like a blacksmith's forge, but the lock held stubbornly. The heat was becoming unbearable. Their exposed skin felt like it was being held over an open flame. Dakota's lungs burned with each breath, and his vision blurred from tears and smoke. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought it might burst. 18 minutes. A section of roof collapsed nearby, sending burning timbers crashing into the main banking floor. The impact shook the entire building, and cracks began appearing in the brick walls surrounding the vault. One of the falling beams struck a gas line, and a jet of flame shot across the room like a dragon's breath. The safe's lock finally surrendered with a metallic shriek that could be heard even over the fire's roar. Inside, exactly as predicted, were Pike's duplicate financial records ledgers that documented every aspect of his criminal empire in meticulous detail. But as Dakota reached for the precious documents, the building's death throes nearly claimed them all. A massive beam overhead gave way completely, sending a ton of burning timber crashing toward their position. The wooden giant fell with the speed of an avalanche, promising to crush anything in its path. Felicity. Dakota's shout was raw with desperation as he saw death descending toward the woman who had become his heart, his anchor, his reason for fighting. Time seemed to slow as he launched himself across the smoke-filled room, knowing he had only seconds to reach her. His body acted before his mind could process the danger, driven by the absolute certainty that losing her would mean losing everything that mattered. He struck her at waist level, sending both of them tumbling away from the impact zone just as the burning beam crashed into the floor where she had been standing. They rolled together across the debris-littered floor, their bodies pressed close as burning fragments rained around them. For a heartbeat, their faces were inches apart. His dark eyes locked with her thundercloud ones in a moment of absolute vulnerability and connection. The heat, the danger, the nearness of death, all of it crystallized into perfect clarity. "I thought I lost you," he whispered against her ear, his voice hoarse from smoke and emotion. "Never," she whispered back, her hand finding his cheek through the soot and ash. "I love you, Dakota. Whatever happens, I love you." The confession hung between them like a prayer spoken in the face of death, and made more precious by the possibility that they might not survive to explore its meaning. 15 minutes. Lenato's voice cut through their moment of connection, but the Crow Warrior's expression showed he understood what he'd witnessed. Love had been declared in the crucible of mortal danger, and it was a beautiful thing even in the midst of hell. They gathered the ledgers and fought their way back through the inferno, the precious documents clutched against Dakota's chest like a shield. The return journey was even more treacherous. Then their entry sections of floor had collapsed, creating deadly gaps that glowed with molten heat, while hanging gaslight fixtures sparked and swayed dangerously overhead. The heat was so intense now that their clothing began to smolder. Felicity's skirt caught fire briefly before she stamped it out, leaving angry red burns on her legs. Dakota's shirt was singed through in multiple places, the fabric literally cooking against his skin. 12 minutes. The building's main support structure was failing rapidly, now creating a symphony of groaning timber and cracking masonry that warned of imminent total collapse. They burst through the delivery entrance just as the clock tower came crashing down, its brick facade exploding into fragments that peppered the ground around them like deadly hail. The impact sent shockwaves through the earth, and several nearby buildings lost windows to the concussion. But they were alive, and they had the evidence. Pike's duplicate ledgers contained everything needed to expose his criminal network trafficking manifests, bribery payments, falsified government reports, and most damning of all, detailed records of workers who had been murdered for asking too many questions. The fire continued to rage behind them as they stumbled away from the collapsing bank, their clothes singed and their faces blackened with soot. But they had accomplished the impossible. They had penetrated Pike's stronghold and emerged with proof of his crimes. However, their triumph was short-lived. Pike himself had arrived in Carbon Creek, his face purple with rage as he watched his carefully constructed empire threatened by a handful of fugitives who refused to die quietly. He had mobilized every available man, creating a dragnet that covered every road trail and hiding place within 20 miles of the burning bank. The manhunt that followed pushed them beyond the limits of human endurance. They rode hard through broken country, following game trails and creek beds that provided some concealment, but also threatened to trap them in dead-end canyons. Behind them, Pike's riders maintained relentless pressure, their superior numbers, allowing them to check every possible escape route simultaneously. At Willow Creek, swollen by recent storms into a raging torrent, they found their path blocked by the destroyed railroad trestle. The bridge they had burned during their earlier escape now prevented their own retreat, trapping them between flood and Pike's approaching forces. The water was brown with runoff and debris moving so fast that standing waves formed around partially submerged boulders. Tree trunks and fence posts swept past like battering rams, any one of which could crush a horse and rider instantly. The current was strong enough to pull down a strong swimmer, and the water was cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes. It was Lars Nystrom who provided salvation, appearing at the creek's edge, with a rope and anchor system he had improvised from his farming equipment. The Norwegian homesteader had ridden through the night after seeing the fires glow on the horizon, correctly guessing that the fugitives would need help crossing the swollen stream. "Hurry," Lars called, securing his rope to a sturdy cottonwood tree. "Pike's men are 6 minutes behind you." The crossing was treacherous beyond description. The storm had turned Willow Creek into a death trap filled with debris that could kill instantly. The rope provided guidance, but no guarantee of safety. One slip would mean death in the churning waters. Dakota went first, testing each step carefully as the current tried to sweep his feet from under him. The water reached his chest at the deepest point, and the cold was so intense it made his muscles cramp. His heart hammered against his ribs as he fought the current, each step a battle against forces that wanted to drag him under. Halfway across, disaster struck again. A waterlogged tree trunk, completely invisible beneath the muddy surface, slammed into him with the force of a sledgehammer. The impact drove him under, and for terrifying seconds, he disappeared beneath the flood. The precious ledgers in his saddlebags were threatened by the same waters that threatened his life. Dakota. Felicity's scream was raw with terror as she watched him vanish beneath the brown torrent. Without hesitation, she plunged into the creek, the rope around her waist, her only lifeline. The current immediately tried to sweep her downstream, but she fought against it with desperate strength, her eyes scanning the churning water for any sign of him. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat, and her breathing came in panicked gasps as she searched desperately for the man she loved. A piece of debris struck her shoulder, sending pain shooting down her arm, but she ignored it. The rope around her waist was beginning to fray where it rubbed against the sharp rocks, and she could feel it starting to give way under the strain. Her fingers found his leather vest just as the current swept him toward a tangle of debris that would have crushed him against the creek bank. With strength born of love and desperation, she hauled him back to the surface, both of them gasping and choking on muddy water. "I've got you." She gasped, her arms around him as they struggled against the current. "I won't let go. I can't exist in a world without you." The confession was torn from her heart by the nearness of death and the certainty of her feelings. In that moment, suspended in the deadly water with death inches away, they looked into each other's eyes and saw their future if they could survive the next few minutes. "I love you." Dakota whispered the words, carrying all the emotion he'd held back during their desperate flight. "You are my heart, my reason for fighting, my hope for tomorrow." "And I love you," she whispered back, her thundercloud eyes blazing with fierce emotion. "Now let's get out of this river alive, so we can have that tomorrow." They reached the far bank as Pike's advance riders appeared on the opposite shore, men, their rifles trained on the fugitives, but unable to fire accurately across the flood-swollen creek. The mine owner himself arrived moments later, his face contorted with rage as he realized his quarry had once again escaped his trap. The final confrontation took place on the muddy banks of Willow Creek as dawn broke gray and sullen over Wyoming territory. Pike's forces had finally cornered them in a position where escape seemed impossible, caught between the raging flood and armed men who had orders to kill. But reinforcements arrived in the form of Dr. George Whitlow, who appeared from downstream carrying Judge Antonine's federal warrants and accompanied by territorial marshals who had been investigating reports of peonage kidnapping conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice in the mining regions. The shooting started when Pike raised his rifle toward the elderly physician, his face twisted with murderous rage. "You, interfering old fool. You should have stayed in your clinic." Dr. Whitlow threw himself sideways as Pike fired the bullet, passing close enough to tear his coat sleeve, but missing flesh. But Pike's second shot found its mark, catching the doctor in the chest and sending bright blood spreading across his white shirt. Yet even as he fell, the elderly physician managed one final act of defiance. He hurled the federal warrants across the creek to Dakota, ensuring that Pike's crimes would not die with him. "Justice," Dr. Whitlow whispered as he collapsed, his kind eyes fixing on Dakota's face. "Make it count, my boy. Make it all count." The doctor's sacrifice galvanized everyone present. Pike's own men began to waver, as they realized they were no longer just chasing fugitives. They were preparing to gun down federal witnesses in front of multiple officers of the law. Some began lowering their weapons, unwilling to commit murder that would bring federal marshals down on their heads. But Roaring Jack Cassidy had no such scruples. Pike's chief enforcer raised his rifle toward Felicity, his scarred face twisted with bloodlust. "Time to finish this." Jack snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger. The crack of a rifle shot echoed across the creek, but it was Jack who staggered backward, his weapon flying from suddenly nerveless fingers. Felicity stood with Dr. Whitlow's Colt Army revolver in her hands, smoke rising from the barrel, her face set with grim determination. "No more," she said quietly, her German accent thick with emotion. "No more killing of good people." Wrote, Lonato kills enemy, chose that moment to emerge from concealment upstream, leading a group of freed workers who had armed themselves with weapons taken from Pike's guards. The Crow Warrior's appearance tipped the balance decisively. Pike's men found themselves facing not helpless fugitives, but determined fighters who had suffered under the mine owner's tyranny and were ready to end it. Judge Antonin's arrival with additional territorial marshals provided the final punctuation to Pike's defeat. The magistrate had followed the smoke and gunfire from Sidewinder Springs, accompanied by federal law enforcement officials who had been building a case against trafficking operations throughout the territory. "Mr. Pike, Judge Antonin," announced formally, his French accent giving weight to the official proceedings. "You are under arrest for violations of federal law, including peonage, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice." Pike's response was to laugh bitterly, his face still twisted with rage, even in defeat. "You think you've won something? I built this territory from nothing. Without me, these people would still be living in dirt hovels and teepees. You built an empire of slavery and murder." Dakota replied quietly, still holding the precious ledgers that documented Pike's crimes. "My brother died because he threatened your profits. These women suffered because you saw them as property. Dr. Whitlow died because he stood for justice. That ends today." The evidence they had preserved through fire flood and gunfight proved conclusively that Pike's operation was a criminal conspiracy of enormous scope. The duplicate ledgers documented bribes to local officials, falsified safety reports, and the systematic trafficking of workers throughout the territorial mining industry. As Pike and his associates were led away in chains, Dr. Whitlow's body was prepared for burial with the respect due a man who had died defending justice. The elderly physician's sacrifice had broken Pike's power at the crucial moment, ensuring that his victims would finally receive justice. 6 weeks later, the transformation of the territory began in earnest. Federal oversight revolutionized the mining industry, implementing safety standards that had been ignored for years. Workers who had been trapped in debt servitude found themselves truly free for the first time since arriving in America. Mary Collins emerged from hiding to reclaim her teaching position, establishing a new school that served not only Bitter Creek, but also the surrounding mining camps. Her curriculum included lessons in workers' rights and basic legal knowledge, ensuring that future generations would be better equipped to resist exploitation. Lars Nystrom's farm became a symbol of agricultural prosperity in the region, his irrigation system providing water not only for his own crops, but also for neighboring homesteads. The Norwegians' generosity created a network of mutual support that strengthened the entire valley's agricultural base. Copper Jim used his reward money from federal authorities to establish an honest mining operation that prioritized workers' safety over maximum profit. His enterprise employed many of Pike's former victims, providing them with dignified work under fair conditions. Lonato Kills Enemy accepted a position as liaison between tribal authorities and territorial mining interests, his experience with Pike's operation making him invaluable in protecting other Native workers from similar exploitation. But it was the transformation in Dakota and Felicity that represented the most profound change. The relationship that had begun as protection duty and evolved through shared hardship into mutual dependence had matured into the kind of love that could weather any storm. 3 months after Pike's defeat, they were married in Mary Collins' new schoolhouse with Judge Antonin officiating and the entire community attending. It was a frontier wedding that reflected frontier values, practical rather than elaborate, focused on commitment rather than ceremony, and grounded in the reality of building a life together in challenging circumstances. In Lakota tradition, Dakota explained to the gathered witnesses, his voice steady with conviction, "Marriage is not just joining of 2 people, but joining of 2 families, 2 communities. Felicity brings skills and knowledge that make us all stronger. Together, we build future that honors both our peoples." His wedding vow continued with words that came from his heart. "You have been my anchor in every storm, my reason to fight when hope seemed lost. I promise to protect not just your safety, but your dreams, to honor not just your strength, but your gentleness, to build with you a life worthy of the struggles we have shared." Felicity's response was equally heartfelt. "Papa taught me that the strongest partnerships combine different strengths. Dakota has shown me that real bravery is not the absence of fear, but acting rightly despite fear. Together, we can face whatever comes." Her vow concluded with words that spoke to their shared future. "I promise to stand beside you, not as someone who needs protection, but as your equal partner in all things. To share your burdens and your joys, to help you build something good from the ashes of what we have lost, to love you not just in easy times, but especially when the path grows difficult." As autumn settled over Wyoming territory and their first year of marriage progressed, Dakota and Felicity found themselves building the kind of life neither had imagined possible during their desperate flight from Bitter Creek. Their partnership had evolved from protection duty through mutual dependence into the deeper bond that sustains true partnership's love, that grows stronger under pressure rather than breaking. The small house they had built on the edge of Lars's property reflected their union in every detail. The structure combined Lakota building techniques with German craftsmanship, creating a home that honored both their backgrounds while pointing toward their shared future. The garden Felicity tended used irrigation methods Dakota had learned from various tribes, while the workshop where he repaired equipment for local farmers bore tools crafted in German tradition. Their daily routine had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a working partnership. Mornings found them tending their garden and planning the day's work together. Afternoons brought visits to the school clinic where they helped Mary and Greta serve the community's needs, and evenings were spent in the quiet conversation of 2 people who had survived extraordinary circumstances together. Content. Felicity asked one evening, as they watched the sun set over the restored prairie, her head resting against his shoulder as they sat on their porch. "Complete," he replied, his work-hardened hands gentle as they covered hers. "Found what I was looking for, even though it wasn't what I expected to find." Their love story had not been the dramatic romance of popular fiction, but something deeper and more enduring, a partnership forged in crisis, tested by hardship and strengthened by the daily choice to build something worthwhile together. It was love in the truest frontier sense, practical yet profound, grounded in mutual respect and shared purpose. As they discussed their plans for the coming year, expanding their garden, perhaps starting a family, helping Mary establish a regional network of schools, Lakota marveled at how completely his life had been transformed. The scarred warrior, who had ridden into Bitter Creek seeking one thing, had found everything he had never known he needed. One evening, as winter approached, and the first snow dusted the mountains, Copper Jim arrived with a discovery that would provide final closure to their ordeal. His mining operation had uncovered a cache hidden in the old tunnel's personal effects and papers that had belonged to workers who disappeared during Pike's reign of terror. Among them was a final letter from Lonato, carefully preserved and intended for his brother. "My brother, if you read this, someone has found what I hoped would never be necessary. My final words to you. By now you know that I died trying to expose Pike's crimes, and I hope you know that I faced death without fear. I have learned much in my time here, lessons I want to share with you. The old warrior ways are not gone. They are transforming, becoming something new, but still true to our hearts. I fought with evidence and testimony, with patience and careful planning. You will fight in your own way, with your own strengths. I have seen something beautiful here, even in the midst of evil, the quiet heroism of ordinary people. The miner who shares his last bit of water with a weaker man. The doctor who treats injuries without asking for payment he knows will never come. The teacher who refuses to let children go uneducated simply because their parents are poor. These people show me that our ancestral values, what you might call the soaring spirit of the eagle, live not in grand gestures, but in daily acts of compassion and resistance. Your path will be different from mine, but no less important. Find your own way to serve, to protect, to build something good from the ashes of what has been destroyed. The strength of our people flows in new channels now, but it flows still. Build a life worthy of our ancestors' sacrifices. Love deeply as our people have always loved. Fight for justice as our people have always fought. But do it in the world as it is not as it was. This is how we honor the past while serving the future. If I do not survive to see you again, know that I died believing the future belongs to those who refuse to surrender their humanity, no matter how harsh the world becomes. The letter was signed with Lonato's clan mark and dated the day before his murder. Dakota felt the final weight of grief and guilt lift from his shoulders as he read his brother's words. Lonato had not just died for justice, he had lived for it, and he had passed that mission to his brother in the most meaningful way possible. He would be proud of what you've accomplished. Felicity said softly, her hand finding his as they stood together in their home. He would be proud of what we accomplished. Dakota corrected, his eyes meeting hers with deep appreciation. Together. As spring returned to Wyoming territory with renewed promise, Dakota and Felicity found themselves looking toward a future bright with possibility. Their chosen family had grown to include Mary and Greta Lars and Anna Copper Jim, and even Judge Antonin, who had become a regular correspondent. They were building something new from the ashes of Pike's tyranny, a community based on mutual respect rather than exploitation, on cooperation rather than domination. Their story was complete, their debts to justice paid in full. Their future bright with the promise of love, earned through trials and strengthened by choice. In a territory where so many stories ended in tragedy, theirs had found its way to hope, love, and the quiet satisfaction of work well done.